I'm Ian. I'm one of the co-editors of AcademiaSG. I also teach at NUS, and I'm a non-resident fellow at non-resident scholar at Carnegie China. I'm the moderator for this afternoon, and I guess it's partially my job to keep you awake from your food coma. But as like I said, we have a very big panel of 5 people, so I'm going to try to make best use of our time. We have today. Our presentation will follow the order on the program, which first we have Kokila Annamalai, a very experienced community organizer. We'll have Stephanie Chok after her, who's Executive Director of Home, followed by Debby Giam from SG Climate Rally, and Corinna Lim from Bukit Brown. Bukit Brown was one of the first things I worked on when I came back to Singapore, so I'm happy that Kat's here. And of course, Corinna Lim from Aware. So to try to keep to time, and so you're all not too surprised, I will also set an alarm, like at the end of 15 minutes. It will sound somewhat like that. If you're wondering, the lyrics go, change, now it's time for change. All right, okay, so without much further ado, Cookie? If you want, up to you.
Do I control my... Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, the slides are there. Okay, so thank you for having me. Today I'm going to be drawing on some of my experiences working with TJC, the Transformative Justice Collective, Workers Make Possible, and a community organization I work with that does organizing in low-income rental flat neighborhoods, to share some things that I've been reflecting on about why we do research as organizers, as community organizers, and what impacts that can have. So, so the first thing I wanted to talk about was like doing research for the building of critical consciousness, right? And research that is, and I think I include in that sharing data, sharing knowledge. And one way that I think about it is building the story of I, and moving from the story of I to the story of us. So this is like drawn from Marshall Ganz's framework of the story of I, the story of us, and the story of now. And I think often, in my observation, what builds critical consciousness in communities, amongst workers, amongst the margins, and any group that is oppressed, is the story of I in the sense of placing the self in time and space, right? So, like for example, I think it is the connection with histories of workers' actions that places the worker today changes the story of who he or she is today, right? So I think when we talk to students, for example, about the history of student activism in Singapore, it changes the story of I as a student today. So is that placing in a historical time, and like where we are in this time, and where we are in this place, like what is this region we're in? Like, why do I live in a rental flat neighborhood? What is in relation to the rest of this society, right? Why am I in this university campus? So placing ourselves, I think, in time and place politicizes the story of I. And often research helps to do that by connecting those stories and telling people bigger stories, co-constructing with them bigger stories of who we are, right? And expansive stories of who we are. And so I think this moving from the story of, a lot of the times I've seen the value of research in moving, connecting all of our I stories into us stories, right? So things that might be experienced by tenants in a rental flat as hardships, as individuals. When we do research on, say, the shared health experiences of people in that neighborhood, or their shared experiences with food insecurity, or their shared experiences with sexual violence, and present it back to them, then it becomes a story of us. And that becomes political in a very powerful way, because it also allows the moving of our constructs of individual hardship to collective grievance, right? Because if it is just my family, that I'm struggling with like putting food on the table, and there's a lot of like state narratives of individual failure and that reinforce this experience of it as just a hardship. When it becomes collectivized, like actually, my neighbors are also struggling to put food on the table. What's going on here? It's not just me that got turned away at the hospital, it's my neighbors too who are struggling to get access to healthcare. It becomes a grievance, it becomes a political issue, and that creates space for agitation, right, towards action. So I think the power of doing community research with communities means, and doing what I would call like barefoot research or grassroots research means that we can, that it creates a space for these groups to make meaning and build narrative about shared struggles and shared aspirations together. And I think what I've often found really powerful is seeing the relief and seeing the power that people feel when they're allowed to have honest confrontations with the injustice in their lives, right? And it demystifies a lot of things for them. So, it's just simple things like when we shared demographic data with a group of residents in a rental flat neighborhood about how many % of the residents are Malay. And then immediately they point to the slide and they're like, yes, because we live in a racist society. And then they're suddenly all angry and then they're talking to each other about why this is going on. And it's not as if they don't see it every day in their neighborhood whenever they look around that most people are Malay. But the data provides like an opening, right, to confront this honestly together in a way that can be quite transformative in my experience. And similarly, when we have conversations with workers who are delivery riders about how much money the Grab CEO makes, like instantly it becomes agitational, and it provides this frame of reference. So I think it's like data sharing, knowledge sharing, and doing research with communities can be really transformative in also its ability to allow people to place blame and anger in its correct place, right? The recognition of where harm originates from, because often there is a lot of anger, right? There is a lot of blame, but often it's displaced, like workers blaming local workers blaming migrant workers, or rental flat tenants blaming their other tenants who are also competing for the same welfare resources, and all kinds of things that go into kind of how people internalize propaganda or internalize dominant narratives of why their lives are the way they are. And research and knowledge sharing can help to replace, I think, in its correct place, this indignation. And I think the other power of it I've seen is data as provocation for communities to confront things within their own practices, right? So data's provocation of how much sexual violence is going on in a community. When it is like data in the hands of the state or data that is not localized, I think it has a different impact, as opposed to when a neighborhood can sit together and look at data of how much sexual violence is going on in their community, and the possibilities that opens up for direct and immediate action, right? And localized, contextualized action. And I think then the story of us allows then the moving to the story of now. Because once we have a story of our collective shared struggles, our collective experiences, our collective grievances, it's possible to then ask, what shall we then do together in this moment? How do we respond to these circumstances? And so a lot of the research that we do in the organizations I work with also focuses on unearthing assets, strengths, strategies, and best practices within worker groups, within communities, right? Because of the starting point that they're the experts of their lives. So it's not this trajectory of only speaking to people about their lived experiences, but about their political opinions, about actually what are the things that they're doing daily to cope, to address this, to struggle against this, and everyday forms of resistance are then unearthed in this process and shared with peers, right, amongst each other. So if it's like there's families that are struggling with getting access to milk, these are also families that are finding a way to get milk to their hungry children. And so there is a lot of the research then focuses on neighbors being able to share this information, produce this information together, and then share it with each other so that it becomes, it opens up more possibilities for activation and action, right? I think the other thing is the knowledge transfer across contexts. I think it's as much as it is important to understand the shared and localized experiences together and make meaning of them, it is also really powerful to see what other people in other contexts are doing about it, right? So whether it is a group of delivery riders here doing knowledge sharing, as in receiving knowledge sharing from delivery riders in other contexts and how they're engaged in struggle, how they're fighting the oppressions that are shared, or whether it's one community of rental flat tenants who've developed a community-based intervention to a health concern, sharing it with another community of rental flat tenants who haven't, or who are just about starting to do it. So in some of the work that we've done, research has really helped mobilize communities around issues like food security, health, child safety, and it has often shifted their perspectives on these issues quite profoundly, I think. So I also want to talk about research as connection, research as building empathy, building peer support and solidarity, because when in the kind of research that I'm engaged in, often it is the members within that group, whether it's rental flat tenants or group of delivery riders, who are doing the surveys, who are doing the research, right? So we use like community mapping approaches where they go, like community leaders within the neighborhood might go door knocking or do home visits as peer researchers, and it becomes a way in which they connect with their peers and other tenants. And often, I think what's quite special to see is the original research question they have might change quite profoundly because of the unlearning that happens in the connection. So there was a group of mums who started a project in their neighborhood around why children are wandering in the neighborhood, like young children are just like unsupervised and wandering. They were concerned about their safety. And initially their impulse was, how do we get these children to stop wandering, right? And like go back home or be, like why their parents aren't looking after them. But as they spoke to the parents, who are single parents, often working multiple jobs, their question shifted to how can we make the neighborhood a safe place for these children who are exploring it and should be able to be safe in this neighborhood while they wander autonomously? Because like, why can't we all become caregivers of these children rather than expect the parents who are actually in their material circumstances unable to do anything differently? So it actually, the community leaders who started the project had quite a judgmental attitude towards the single parents and this, who are the parents of these children, but it shifted through the process of doing this research, right? Because it built solidarity. Yeah, and it's also a really, can be quite an impactful process of discovering the everyday strategies and knowledges that their peers have and how they're coping with things that you know the researchers in the community might not know how to deal with too, like how some families are like getting milk from like JB or doing other things, and they learn and then share this information with others in the community, right? The other way that I think we use research, and it can be powerful, is as an organizing tool. So when delivery riders want to build an association and expand the group that they already have and bring more delivery riders together, research becomes, like doing a survey becomes a really like easy point of connection. Like, and it's also a way to build this collective narrative and learn like, oh, what do other delivery riders want? Actually, like are the demands that the few of us have come up with, are these aspirations shared, right? But it's also a way of, it's an easy way to justify a conversation, to have an excuse for a conversation in context where actually it's quite, in Singapore, I think not very natural to a lot of people to just go up to their peers and talk about political issues or workplace issues. A survey becomes a good excuse, right, to organize each other. Yeah, so, sorry, how much time do I have left?
You've got 3 minutes.
Okay. So just to share some maybe perspective from the TJC experience, I think in our context, I see research as counter-hegemony, as like the power of like revealing what people in positions of power would rather keep shrouded in mystery. So we did the first independent study on prison conditions in Singapore, and it really like centered the voices of a lot of people who'd been to prison, and that's not, you know, and as such, then it exists to contest the narratives of the state around how prison is rehabilitative and so on and so forth. But I think research and in itself, and research methods can be a form of inherent resistance. Like when we do life history interviews about people who are about to be executed, where the state is denying their humanity and putting them to death, and that choosing that moment to celebrate their lives and kind of tell the stories that the state doesn't want told, I think has been a really important vehicle in our activism too. And okay, I will skip this because I don't have time. Okay, okay, this is my last slide then. So yeah, I think like what I was saying earlier, something I've really learned is that I think we do much better when we can honor the knowledge production that is constantly happening on the margins. There's so much to learn from how workers look after each other, how low-income families look after each other. And when you don't have access to mainstream resources and systems, there are so many creative solutions that people come up with every day, and there is much to learn from that. And so when we work with and in solidarity with people on the margins, it's not just a journey of inquiring into their lived experiences and then analyzing or theorizing outside of the interview. But that time together is a time of becoming politically alive together, right? Of co-constructing knowledge, of theorizing together, and of centering the analysis, the innovations, the strategies, the ideas that people on the margins constantly have, and the intellectual labor that they're constantly producing. And so then I guess in closing, I'd like to pose a challenge to, or an invitation to reimagine or expand research for advocacy pathways that are traditionally imagined here. And I guess that's the topic of the session, right? Research for advocacy. And I think it's often a process of interviewing subjects as a researcher and then making recommendations to the policymaker or then publishing this research to the public. But can it become a process of doing not just the research together, but then it is so powerful for communities to see these narratives of and it can really stimulate quite powerful political action when communities have access to data and knowledge and narrative building about their lives that they're participating in. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Koki. Next, we have Steffi.
Use this mic? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be here. Thank you, AcademiaSG, for inviting me. If you actually took the time to read my abstract, I've changed it like 3 times since. So I apologize if it's not like what you expected. So I'll just speak very broadly about research for advocacy. And in the current context, I would say that engaging in research for advocacy is in itself a political choice, a political act. And currently, as many of you in this room would relate to, research for advocacy is undertaken under rather hostile conditions. So I guess the question then arises as to why do we keep doing it or why it matters. And I would say that it has partly to do with how different forms of knowledge are legitimized and valued, and also about making visible the structural vis-a-vis individual experiences. So how do we know what we know? We accrue knowledge and expertise in a lot of different ways. Scholars, for example, may engage in sustained study and observation. There's knowledge that comes from lived experience. And there's also knowledge that comes from bearing witness, right? From regular, sustained exposure to hardship and multiple forms of oppression that's faced by marginalized communities. So if you're a social worker, if you're a case worker, if you're a volunteer with an NGO, you're familiar with bearing witness in this way. And there are contradictory responses to such knowledge. On the one hand, it can be very sought after. And again, if you work in an NGO, you'll be familiar with this. The media, students, consultants increasingly, and other researchers will be constantly emailing you, right? Asking you for your on-the-ground knowledge, saying that they want to understand the issues, right? So it's sought after, but on the other hand, such knowledge is also, at the same time, often dismissed by policymakers as anecdotal, as exceptional, and sometimes also exaggerated. There's a very strong imperative by policymakers to individualize instances and stories of oppression and hardship. So for me personally, research introduces a more systematic means of organizing and categorizing knowledge, of making visible persistent patterns, to unveil what is often framed as individual and exceptional as structural. It offers us a means to interrogate social arrangements and hierarchies and how they impact particular people in different and very profound ways. It exposes power asymmetries. And it also unveils how everyday conduct can create and sustain everyday injustices. In a system of structural injustice, all you really need to do is your job or what you're told in order to enact structural violence against marginalized communities. Whether you're a social worker doing means testing according to standard operating procedure, or a police officer who's doing what you're told. So what you're saying and demonstrating is, and as a researcher, I feel this very strongly, you're saying that problematic encounters with law enforcement, demeaning or stigmatizing interactions with social service providers, emotional abuse by employers, these are not random one-off instances. You're doing the work of tracking, of documenting, of analyzing, of triangulating, of verifying and making clear that these are not just ad hoc complaints, where if you just remove one problematic officer or if you make one small policy tweak, the problem is solved. We're talking about entrenched systems of discrimination. We're talking about regimes that are propped up by a complex range of dehumanizing policies. So for me, research is also about leaving a footprint, leaving a certain indent on existing discourse. So we write a report on forced labor because we want to say forced labor exists. We want to introduce the terminology. We want to show you how it manifests. We introduce the term, we write a position paper on wage theft because wage theft is a more accurate way of describing what many workers experience, which is criminal behavior to consistently and persistently underpay and manipulate wages. We are introducing terminology, we are enlarging the discourse, we are shining a spotlight and imposing a new lens on what has been normalized in our society but must always continue to discomfort. So as much as I encourage research and I feel very strongly about research for advocacy, I also would like to acknowledge some of the tensions and trade-offs, right? As much as I would like to encourage more people and groups to engage in research and widely share their findings, I admit that research is very resource intensive. When you choose to engage in research for small, under-resourced organizations, it might also mean shifting your priorities in terms of your bandwidth and your funding, and these trade-offs have to be negotiated with the teams that you work with. So when you introduce data collection for advocacy purpose into work that's already being done, you may hear a collective groan from the caseworkers who have to go and join you in your data collection. When you also potentially change the tenor of the interactions that people have when people start to feel like they are a research participant, right? So these are also some of the things that you need to think about because it also introduces new ethical responsibilities when you start to do data collection as part of your work. There's also the tension that comes from wanting very strongly to normalize activist research and encourage more people to do it, but also to openly acknowledge the risks that comes with engaging in certain forms of research that is critical of the status quo. Research is also not just research intensive, it can be hard to determine the impact and also explain to donors who want research. And when your research is not linked to scalable outcomes, it can be very difficult to justify to donors as well, right? So I guess I'm actually gonna wrap up because I would like to spend more time on Q&A. I would say that maybe I would end on a more forward-looking note, which is what some of my aspirations are. So HOME is quite keen to encourage capacity building to empower activists to conduct research for advocacy. So earlier this year, we've already conducted one workshop on qualitative interview skills. We would like to continue conducting more workshops on data analysis, on how to organize focus groups, how to design surveys. So this is and maybe, if possible, offer some mentorship. And I guess this is a call out to everybody in the room if you are interested to help us do this on a pro bono basis, because we offer these workshops for free to other activists who are interested in doing research. Please reach out to me and let me know. In terms of resources, I hope that there will be more funding specifically for research. And also, we do get a lot of invitations for partnerships, but I would say that maybe a more intentional way to make partnerships more egalitarian and respectful so that, because there are a lot of power dynamics also between institutions that want to partner with NGOs for research work. In terms of the political context, I guess there's still a lot of suspicion of advocacy-driven research, and I guess I hope that the environment would be shaped in some way such that there isn't this prickliness or general suspicion of advocacy-driven research, but acknowledgement that such research is useful and necessary for social change. Yeah. Okay, that's it for me.
Thanks, Steffi.
Hi everyone, I'm Debby. I'm the editorial head in SG Climate Rally, along with Isaac, who is also in the audience today. So together we actually oversee all the content and the direction of the content that we put out as SG Climate Rally. So before I begin, I would actually like to go back to the previous panel for those who are here and answer Amy's question as from the position of an advocacy group in Nimbus. Okay, so for those who don't know, just now the question was essentially kind of implying that advocating for a particular cause will kind of pollute the integrity or credibility of your own media production. So to that, I would like to say that that knowledge is in itself political. And this can especially be seen in climate science, where companies have known for longer than I've been alive the effects of fossil fuels on our planet. And yet that knowledge has been used to create marketing campaigns. Like the carbon footprint concept was actually created by British Petroleum to transfer the responsibility from corporates onto consumers. And I think that is where advocacy comes in. It's choosing differently how we want to look at our information, because we all have the same information, right? And this is not even talking about the language. So maybe to give an example, this is a clip from one of the posts that we have done. It's showcasing the US's contribution in military funding to Israel and their contribution to the Climate Loss and Damage Fund. I think, like as Arfin just now talked about, I can just show you this and you can make your own conclusions. Right? And I think this does not, I think in fact using information like that builds our credibility as a movement rather than discounts it. Okay, so now, right. And another point related to how knowledge is kind of like used in climate science is that climate science in itself is not something very accessible to the general public. I think scientists and maybe also academics are notoriously bad at sharing their research in a manner that is more like understandable by the general public, you know. So yeah, that's where we are now. So let me go back to the usual programming.
I think she's talking about you.
No. Right, so today I wanted to bring you through like our journey as SG Climate Rally. I think in 2019, the first rally actually had the effect of like politicizing the climate movement. Environmental groups have been around for a very, very long time, but the kind of default approach to making change happen in Singapore especially would be to like work with the government, work with NEA, etc. And that is an approach that we have also kind of tried at the first rally. So if I can show you, this was the 2019 rally's calls to action. And since then, we have actually managed to kind of like move the needle quite a lot. And not only like, we don't take all the credit for this, of course, the international movement also helped, like international pressure and the overall expansion of the business sustainability sector, as controversial as it may be, has also helped to further the movement. But I think what we need at this point in time is to move from simply a recognition of the climate crisis to thinking about a more holistic way to approach our current ways of life. And that leads me to the points about climate justice. I also want to show you this overturned window. So just now, I think there was also a lot of talk about how if you appear too radical, are you sure you are appealing to like the public? You know, what will people think of you? Are you just appealing to the people who are already part of the cause? So I think to that I say, the current environmental space has expanded so much that many other groups are already doing many wonderful things that we do not need to replicate. And so where I see SG Climate Rally as coming in is focusing on expanding the boundaries of what climate policy covers and push for a wider acceptance of social justice concepts that is grounded in the understanding of us as Singaporeans as global citizens, rather than just looking at the impact that we have on our lands. So for such a small country, you must know that Singapore actually has an extremely outsized impact. So climate justice is the recognition that the impacts of the climate crisis are disproportionate. Those who contribute the most to it are often the ones who bear the least burden of it. Yeah, so that brings me to another point. This might be a little like abrupt. For those who might recognize, this is one of the posts that we made inspired by Taylor Swift. So every like slide is actually one of her album's references. Yeah. So I think like especially in the climate movement, there's a lot of climate anxiety and climate grief. At every turn we look, there's like something depressing to think about. So in order for our advocacy to not be as pessimistic, we realize that it's important to draw upon pop culture and make things like something that people will want to share, you know, and I think that's also another way to change people's minds. Okay, so I think I'll wrap up with this quote, and I hope to receive your questions in Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I press myself or? Yeah, I can change it myself. Yes, you can. Just get your slides out. What happened to the picture here? The first picture should have a picture of the cemetery. Let me see. That's the first one. Oh, right, no problem. Nice, right? Okay. So, hello. Press what? So now I want this one? Oh, it's up already. But how come the photograph isn't there? It's weird. Weird, huh? It's because it's a cemetery, you see. Yes. Okay, we weren't fussed about because also it'd be good to have time for Q&A, and it's still not there. I'm Catherine. I think I know quite a few of you all in the audience. I would say that when I was doing my research, I came across a very good case study done by CAPE, C-A-P-E, who is also a part of Nimbus. So that is very good if you want a background on Bukit Brown, which I will not go into since it's covered there. Ah, lovely. Look how beautiful it is, yeah? As I said, I wouldn't go into the background, factual background, because CAPE has done a very capable job. So I'll refer you to that. What I will do is to take you behind the scenes to the interactions with the government from the very beginning, and how we started in such a big way with such a big controversy that it made the papers. The very next day that we attended a briefing by the minister, Tan Chuan Jin, So, sorry, what do I press again? The return, is it? Which one? Oh, this arrow. Okay. I call this the wayang engagement. It was really a wayang engagement. So weeks before, interested civil society stakeholders had come together under the leadership of the Nature Society of Singapore and also the Singapore Heritage Society. So these two organizations are known to the government. So we came together, we discussed what we could do, and the first thing is to ask for a meeting with the minister, okay? So this was arranged with the civil servants managing this project. TCJ was actually away during that time. So back and forth until he came back, and then we got a date, okay? The date was 19th March, which was also the day that they announced plans to, their plans for the alignment for the highway, which means that we didn't have a chance to discuss anything with him because there were plans with our group to talk about looking at alternatives, and that didn't happen. So, also at that meeting, it was considered a briefing for interested stakeholders, and our group was limited to one representative per organization, and then they opened up the spaces to other heritage people who were not really involved in our discussions about Bukit Brown. There were heritage people who were interested in heritage in general. Some of them actually came from their engagement with the rail corridor, which was a very successful, I guess, engagement for the minister himself. Also announced at that particular briefing in the evening was the documentation team, which Kevin Tan actually suggested to the LTAs of the CEOs of LTA and URA over breakfast one morning. He can tell you more about that. And he said, you got to do a documentation project. So, okay, a documentation project to seemingly mitigate, I guess, on what they had just announced. So what happened, what we thought was going to a meeting actually morphed into a briefing, which was expanded and extended to every other parties. And what we did, we were actually prepared. There were 7 groups, and we were actually prepared with a statement that called for a moratorium when we didn't and couldn't get the minister to agree to a meeting. We asked, we spoke up, okay? There are people in the group who spoke up during the actual briefing. So, 6 hours later, this was TCJ's response. A meeting was held Monday night, not intended to satisfy Bukit Brown interest groups, because we failed to conduct a session that was in line with what they wanted, i.e. we wanted to have our own briefs and invite others on their invite list. He said it was deemed to be an inadequate effort of genuine engagement. Our statement that was released after we walked out of the meeting, we called for a halt to plans until there's clarity over long-term plans for the area and discussions over alternatives have been exhausted. What in this statement says we wanted our own briefs and we wanted to invite others on their invite list? I don't know. But for me, when I saw his statement, I realized either his civil servants never briefed him on our discussions over email on what we wanted, or they did when he came back and he just ignored it. So what he actually said was, well, it's a lie, because we had been working behind the scenes with his people, okay? So the second part of this comes from a little help from the media, mainstream media, and this came up in one ad op, where the ad op said, oh yeah, civil servants or civil society actually can make a difference. And this is an example. So we immediately responded and said, and this was, I think, a letter drafted by Ian and Claire, that there wasn't any engagement. Never was, after that whole thing blew up. And we also pointed out to the ST that the fact that they were building a bridge was not a concession. Actually, the LTA actually said it was an engineering decision. So I don't know where this reporter got all his facts. But we noticed that there was no response from MND or LTA about this at all to the add-on. So fair enough. That's all right. We stand to correct the mainstream media then. Our response, I think, was very measured. As I've said, we never proceeded after that over the controversy. We never pursued anything more with the government. We went on our way. So this was accomplished. The meeting was in April 2012? We came back in January 2013 with the first exhibition on Bukit Brown. This was at Substation, and in partnership with the Singapore Heritage Society. History from the Hills was something that actually the production company I was working for before actually approached me to ask whether I could help with the production. So that was commissioned, and I did some of the writing, and it debuted in January 2013. And since then, it has been translated into all the major languages, okay? The TED Talk, this was Claire's personal journey, coming back from overseas assignment after many, many years to settle in Singapore. It was very personal. This journey was very personal to her. And then Our Roots, Our Future was an 8-day exhibition at the Tri Huan Lin Teochew Club, which had talked about heritage, habitat, and history from June to July 2013. So in the space of 2 years, this is what we organized. It was visible because actually it received mainstream coverage. All our events received mainstream coverage. The last one, Our Roots, Our Future, even more so because Jane Itogi was our guest of honor to open the exhibition. This is our class act. Raymond Goh, who basically set up the foundation because he has been exploring Bukit Brown for a very long time. He's credited with many significant finds. So this is also, in a way, our response to the advocacy of Bukit Brown. We got awards. This was in 2014. The Singapore Advocacy Awards gave out its, it was an inaugural award, and they gave the organization of the award to the Bukit Brownies. We also, with the help, Ian can tell you more as well about this. Ian and Claire worked on an application to put Bukit Brown on the World Monuments Watch, and we got it. So 2014 was a really good year for us to cap it with 2 awards. Then we got an invitation to meet Benny Lim. I don't know why the words are not there. Let me try the next one. Okay, this is it. An invitation to meet with MND, chaired by the Permanent Secretary, Benny Lim. I think Benny Lim is a name that might strike a chord with some people here. But at the time, he was the Permanent Sec of MND. And this meeting invitation came just after the master plan of, I think, 2013 or 2014 was gazetted. And All Things Bukit Brown, again, with the help of, I think you helped as well, to draft a sort of a standard letter to write to MND, or URA, I think specifically, on why, specifically in the master plan, Bukit Brown should not be tampered with, should be saved. I think that meeting, I would say, was really collegial, and I thought that Benny Lim was sincere in accepting our presentation and even commended us on our efforts. So after that, things worked pretty fast. The multi-agency work group, which has never happened before. So this is our first time we have a seat on the table for discussions. This was what we actually wanted with Tan Chuan Jin, but never got. So things really moved fast. The gates were sent for restoration. They invited Kang Shua to give some inputs. We proposed a wayfinder, which was accepted and fully funded. It was about 60,000 K. this rarely happens. They only partially fund. But immediately after we had this meeting with Benny, okay, we got full funding, okay? Discussions on what to do for the artifacts that had been saved from the exhumation exercise crop in over the years. We have a decision now, but it took many years to come to this decision. NHB is now the chair of this work group, which makes a lot more sense than having MND the chair. We actually, I'm very grateful for the equal support of the arts. So this was Drama Box CIFA 15, and there was an opportunity for the Brownies to speak through the foreign theatre. But not only just theatre, but in books. For example, there's a graphic novel on Bukit Brown. We ourselves actually did a book of essays on World War II at Bukit Brown because we feel the World War II story is still compelling and still needs to be examined. There have been, I can't remember what else we've had. But you know, a lot of the arts support is very important to us, and maybe creates the deepest impact on people's emotional. I'm sorry, I would like to go back a bit and give a shout out to Kevin Tan and Mr. Kwa, who was with us at the meeting with Benny Lim. You gave me a lot of confidence, and you brought up and reminded issues. Didn't I give you a chocolate? That's not one of our strategies, okay? Okay, let's go straight to it. Who are the Brownies? This is very funny. One of my friends thought about it. What we are is, I think we are a group of great friends, but what we are is each of us are individual leaders. Projects don't get done if there's no buy-in. So everyone comes up with a project, and if it's supported, it goes through. I think that was why we got the award, because there was no hierarchy in the organization. It's truly a community, now described as a loose community of volunteers or loose volunteers of a community. Can't quite remember. So what is ahead for us? I'm coming to the end, okay? I'm coming to the end. What is ahead for us? Stop it, 1 minute more. Unlike Heng Swee Kiat, we do have a 10-year runway. We know for certain, because we are on good terms with the government, or specifically NHB, that there will be nothing done to Bukit Brown for the next 10 years. So that is our runway, and this is what we intend to do. We intend to advocate and plan a campaign. I'm trying to think how it should be done to lobby for Bukit Brown to be put on the World Heritage status, okay? And this is perfect because it's the link between colonial history in Botanic Gardens and to Bukit Brown, which is actually the history, it's actually our migrant history, which is actually more important. But I think they never thought that Bukit Brown could have been considered for World Heritage status. So I think we started to plant the thought 12 years ago. And we hope we'll get there in the next 10 years. But I leave you with something that is a demonstration of the kind of support we get from authors, poets, dramatists. And it's a response from Alvin Syed after he visited Bukit Brown with Tien and Woon, who are part of Post Museum. So this is his response. Between Nanyang and the Nusantara, between the past and the future, the living and the dead, I know that there were connections to be made to the soil, the earth deities, the semangat in the trees, the mute sentinels of weathered rock. As I ran a finger down the grainy beard of a stone Sikh guardian, I knew that time saved in a cemetery is so much more important than the time saved on an 8-lane highway. We have so little heritage left in Singapore, I thought I shouldn't be waylaid by questions of whether certain types of heritage are considered more important than others. Questions of what common heritage really means. These questions can wait, because if Bukit Brown is not saved, then we won't even get a chance to consider these questions in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As a feminist, I like to make an observation that all 5 of the speakers in this panel were women, which is fantastic.
Moderated by a Chinese man.
Thank you. This is May 2025, also 15 years after the Aware saga, which in May 2009 was when Aware was taken over. So when I stand here, I am grateful and mindful of the fact that I may not have been standing here if we had lost in 2009. So I find civil society in Singapore to be, in a way, quite fragile because it is under-resourced. As a group then in its 25th year, a group of mainly volunteers, we were pretty tired. And I am heartened by the many young faces, voices, much younger than me, people that I've worked with many of you. And I hope that at least because I guess I'm talking from I've been 33 years an activist. I know that I'm probably one of the older persons in this room doing this work. I hope that you will have the stamina and the resources to keep up the fight, because this work is important and it takes a long time to actually make that change. So, where's the clicker here? So I'll go through this and the importance of advocacy, of research in the work that we do, the changes that we've made. Thank you. All right, thanks. Okay. So Aware is quite special in a sense that it was one of the organizations that started as a research and advocacy organization. The name Aware, A-W-A-R-E, is short for the Association of Women for Action and Research. It was founded as a response to the government's rather unfortunate ideas of promoting graduate mothers, right, to have babies, and non-graduate mothers not to have babies. And so this group was formed, and it was formed, after maybe there are 100 people in this room or less, but there was a meeting in response to the graduate mother scheme, and then after that, people in the room got up and said, are we going to come back 10 years later and grumble and rant and rave about another government policy? Right? And so then they decided, let's do some research, find out who's actually doing work that is about women's policy, found out that no one was doing it. All the other groups that were doing women's issues were service groups, and so Aware was founded as a group to look into women's issues, right? It was only about 7 years later that we then started our support services. So that was the next big sort of development in Aware's history. In terms of the research and advocacy that we started in 1985, for about 10 years, a lot of the focus was on gender violence. There was not enough protection on domestic violence, right? The police could go into a home and walk out if there were no broken bones and not do anything except stop the fight, because of a law then that said that unless there's grievous hurt, which meant broken bones, eye, ear, limb hanging out, there was other, then the police could act to arrest, but otherwise they didn't have the power. So that was a lot of the sort of research and advocacy. This is way before the internet. It was really difficult as an advocacy, as a group, to actually do this research and to get the stories out, right? So in 1992, we started our support services. And here is where, in terms of knowledge, it's not just research that you actually do as formal research, but the calls that you get, every single call is knowledge, is a story, is something that builds the data that you need. So when we started the support services, it was with intention to further our research, but also to help women, right? And to understand then what were the challenges that they faced. So it was quite I think, a smart move at that time, and that's about the time that I joined AWARE in 1992. And with the data from the helpline, with the research that the group had done, and the campaigns it had done from 1985 to 1995, when Dr. Kanwaljit Soin became an MP in Parliament, we managed to actually draft and move a family violence bill, which was thrown out, but had the effect of actually getting the government to change the Women's Charter to introduce a much stronger regime of personal protection orders so that the police could act even when there were no broken bones involved. Right? So I was a young lawyer then. I came in to help with the legal clinic. I was hearing these stories about women getting battered by their husbands. And I would tell the women, okay, the next time it happens, you have to call the police. And I knew in my heart that they may not get the support that they needed, right, because of the law. So when I was asked by Dr. Soin to help with drafting the bill, I was very excited. And, it was not the kind of thing that I did as a lawyer, because this is usually done by the Attorney General's chambers. But we followed Malaysia's sort of as a precedent. They had a domestic violence bill. This sort of gave us some inspiration. If Malaysia can do it, certainly Singapore could also try to have a domestic violence bill. And so that was my first foray into research, advocacy, making a change that went well beyond, helping the woman in front of me. Because after the law changed, then all the women now and for the future would have this protection. And that's why, even though the work takes a long time, and I'll give a timeline of one of the things that we've done, it's worth it, right? To get that change in the law. So we have been quite successful in contributing to various changes in the law. And it's mainly through research and making a case and telling the stories and being strategic and finding those issues that really matter to people. Together with the research, advocacy, and services, education, communications is really important. In the past, before internet, it was library talks. It was really like exhibitions where you put up posters. And now with the internet, it's completely different, right? I talk about how, it's a big sort of agenda, gender equality and women's rights. So you have to pick your battles, you have to pick the issues that are going to be most current and most important during the time. So every 3 years, we will do a strategic plan. This is, the pillars are the departments in AWARE, care are the services, training, education, and research and advocacy. The windows of this house can change, right? And so for these 4 years, we have been looking at violence, in particular sexual violence, workplace inclusivity. So We've done a lot of work on workplace discrimination and harassment, and have had some results there. Marginalized women, aging and caregiving, because Singapore is one of the fastest aging countries in the world. So important to focus and to keep reviewing. So every year we will review how we've done and whether we should continue with these issues. We have found, our theory of change is to work at all levels, right? Not just the individual level, but all the way to government. And it is quite a sort of major infrastructure, as Steph said, to do research. It takes a lot of resources. It's number one. To work at more than one level, it takes even more resources. So I think that it's sort of not every group can have a strategy like this. In terms of human rights, women's rights is the one that the government is least sort of opposed to, and we have been able to strengthen our work in this area. And we're one of those groups that is, I think, with what Sharon said, a little bit closer working. We do have access to the government. Every piece of research that we do, we will meet with the government on it. We will try to meet with all the relevant civil servants. We will try to meet with the relevant minister. That there are certain cost, benefit, and constraints that you have. There are trade-offs to this approach, but we have found it also to be an effective way to make change. On the left, or my right, are all the different sort of research pieces, various research pieces that we have come up with. Some we work with partner groups. We've worked with Home on domestic workers and their work in supporting aging women. Also with, let me see, with Daughters of Tomorrow and Why You're Not Working. This was about low-income women and why they weren't working because of the systemic barriers, low wages, caregiving issues. Right? And we, employ different types of advocacy. We can do very aggressive front door advocacy when it calls for it, or backdoor advocacy. Right? And we saw this mix is quite useful, that you have all these tools in your bag, and each time you have to decide how much of the front door, how much of the back door. And it's sort of a strategic and tactical decision that you have to make. So I find that part of the work is treading this sort of this tightrope, which seems to get tighter and in a way more difficult the larger you grow, and the more successful you are. And then the government has also learned how to play this game. So the government now also tries to engage with civil society. When it changed 377A, it did a lot of consultation with different civil society groups, because it actually is now it has learned to play, it's not just that we have learn to work with government. The government has also learned to work more closely with civil society groups. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? We can discuss this. Certainly, we have tried to use it to our advantage. I think Sharon made a point about how a test of the group is really whether or not you sell out your friends, right? In civil society, and that's something that I've been asked my opinions about different people, and I try always to stand by what I really believe in and say, no, this person to me has been very, very grounded in their approach, whether or not you agree with their decision or their views on things. So I think it is important that 1 minute, okay. These are all the things on the right. Yeah. Sure. So different things that we have won in terms of advocacy. 1996, starting from 1976, domestic violence protection. 2014, the Protection of Harassment Act. All the way, right, where decriminalization, criminalization of marital rape, more support for lower income families, going to today, the workplace fairness legislation, FWA guidelines. These are all things that we have had. We have used research. Usually our research is qualitative or quantitative. If it is quantitative, we will work with a market research company who will do either low bono or pro bono so that we can get 1,000 respondents. If it's qualitative, we can do it in-house, and we'll do about 30 to 40. Okay. My last slide, but just to show how long research takes and advocacy takes, this is to get protection in the workplace against, protection against harassment. It started in 2008, 2 research pieces there, and it's sort of a different activities. We also set up the Sexual Assault Care Center where we got more workplace harassment cases. And then we went into the companies in 2014 when we started our own a new department, Catalyze Consulting, that does training and advocacy, training for companies. And then all the way, right, more research in 2021, 2022, because we knew the government was working on workplace legislation. So it takes 10 years, right, to get to where we are. And today we still have one outstanding ask of MOM, which they are considering, and that is whether or not to put a obligation on companies to ensure that the workplace is free from harassment, right? So we've put that in. They've been considering it for 6 months. But that is the advantage of being able to speak to the civil servants, which is that you can be very specific and also very opportunistic when they come out with their legislation. Thank you.
Thank you all.
May you're very conscious of your...
No, it's fine.
Yep. Can.
Yeah. So as people get settled in, I just want to say that this panel, of course, is knowledge for advocacy. One thing that strikes me is how, often as academics, we, are tasked to we ask ourselves, okay, what's the so what with our research? But what you find with advocacy-based research is the so what is very immediate. You're always thinking about it. That, in fact, motivates a lot of the work that they do. So I just want to lay that out there as we consider sort of different modes of engaging knowledge and also presenting knowledge. With that sort of very brief framing, I just want to throw something out very quickly to all of you so we can get everybody else in. When you engage different sorts of groups, how do you sort of calibrate how you want to deploy your knowledge, right? How much you want to press, how much you want to just inform, how much do you want to use it to sort of support the work that your interlocutors may be doing, whether these are political parties, whether these are public servants, because the two are different, or whether this is the public in general or various groups that you engage with. Any thoughts?
I will describe as loose. We don't have any actually formal engagement. I would say that we are very on the fly, on the go, on the fly, and is the particular the research advocacy. It's not really in our approach. I mean, we were dependent a lot on definitely the research of historians who had already researched Bukit Brown and what kind of stories they yielded. But in terms of using that as a point of advocacy, it was not. It was actually, we didn't think about it as being a strategy. We basically are storytellers with loose slips, perhaps. And we integrated all that we knew, whether it be about accomplishments of the pioneers, businessmen, World War II, and we somehow crafted stories. and crafted stories that were also thematic. So that's our process. And as I said, it's a loose process.
I hope I understood your question correctly, but it made me think about something, I guess, a bit tangential, which is what kinds of knowledge are centered in Singapore, right? And also using our opportunities to tell stories or make interventions with knowledge as disruptions to what kinds of knowledge are valued. So if the government is relying on some studies they have done about how they believe, how the death penalty is a deterrent, or the majority of the public believe that the death penalty is a deterrent, then I don't think that it is just like there's value only in countering that narrative with a study on like public opinions that we've done, and then speak on that level of now the conversation has to be framed in terms of whether or not it is a deterrent, right? Like this, I think can be deconstructed or disrupted through like telling stories of people on death row. And so I think it's also about like what terms we engage on, and we don't have to allow those in positions of power to set the terms of what knowledge matters, what arguments matter. And so I know we're talking about counter-narratives, but they don't always have to be counter-arguments. They're about telling our truths and the truths of the communities in ways that are resonant for us. And I think it's also, you talked about different interlocutors, right? And I think often the imagination of knowledge-based advocacy or research-based advocacy is the state as the ultimate, the government as the audience, and speaking to the state. And then sometimes it's about like a strategic reason to go to the public to get support for whatever you're pitching to the government. But I think in my practice, I guess I see the audience as always being ordinary people. And it's dialectical, right? So they're not just like passive recipients of the messages we have, but it is as much about constantly learning from different segments of ordinary people what is resonant for them, what is alive for them, what activates them. And I think when our responses and knowledge-based interventions speak to the people, then they create the political pressure that gives the government no choice but to make changes, right? Through building ground-up pressure. Right, rather than like to go to the government and then use the public as a way to legitimize the things we're pitching to the government. The public is where, I think the conversation needs to be, like the audience needs to be centered as the people and not the government, I feel.
I think this is now totally possible to center the people because, we started our advocacy a long time ago when this was not possible because you had very limited channels. But now everyone can be an activist, and really that I think is a very good way to, and that's why we also have been trying to evolve our work from just advocacy to community. And we now have a new department that just focuses on community and are growing that. So at different times, right, we will have different emphasis, but I feel like community is the new game. Yeah.
So for us, we work a lot with migrant workers, and unfortunately, it is very, very difficult with that particular group in terms of organization and also the repercussions that migrant workers may face if they publicly speak out. So that has been a real stumbling block for us. And I think that within the migrant worker space, we acknowledge that a lot of the hierarchies within the NGO space reflect the hierarchies in society, where it's very often non-migrant workers who are speaking on behalf of migrant worker rights. And I mean, you can only hope that that situation would change, but currently under our labor migration regime, there's just a lot of risk and a lot of ways in which they are under surveillance, and in ways that they are so deportable that just remains very, very difficult and challenging for now. In terms of your question about the different stakeholder groups, I kind of interpret you as asking a little bit whether or not there's some level of code switching between them. So I would say that generally HOME is a rights-based organization, and we don't stray very much from the fact that we remain a rights-based organization, although we might think about the messaging a bit differently. But for example, we do work at a regional and international level, right? So for example, even where you're going for CEDAW, And that's when we would use rights-based language in a certain way, because we're talking about UN frameworks, right? So then in that case, we would use the language that the UN is also using to make a case for what we want to say about migrant worker rights. Yeah.
Right. I think SGCR is situated in exactly like more of the community space. To be honest, the state mechanism for monitoring and studying about climate change has become so advanced that we cannot compete with PUB, NEA, and MSc all combined. So in that sense, like, we realize that that technocratic approach may not necessarily be useful to us anymore. And so we also realize when we are talking to civil servants and stuff like that, that actually like the nature community pretty much has the same goals to protect the planet. It's just the different constraints that are placed upon us because of our different roles, including the role of being a civil servant. So that made us kind of question what are the assumptions that the state has that are imposed on the civil servants, and how do we change that? So I think we're talking more about a cultural shift, perhaps. So some of these assumptions include like the assumption that economic growth is always good and business interests should always be prioritized. So then how can we start socializing the concept of even degrowth to Singaporeans without maybe explicitly saying degrowth, because that may put people off, right? Yeah.
I'd like to turn this to the audience. We don't have that much time, so anybody who'd like to pose a question, please do so. Yes, George.
Right, thank you. So this is just a follow, I think, to Chirian's comment earlier. I think that conversation that you had around, I think, as civil society organizations like yourself grow, there's always the possibility of co-optation by the establishment, and I don't mean just the government, but also all the different bodies and all. I mean, so I wanted to get a sense from your take, right? How do you resist, address, confront co-optation, possibilities, and how would that in some ways affect, right, the kinds of standing you have in Singapore society? Thank you.
Anybody? Yeah, actually, we can collect a few. That's great. Anybody else? Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. I actually didn't see 5 women, just on a gender kind of thing, doing this panel. I actually saw a lot more in age, right? So I've got a question for Debby, because when Cherry and or whoever came up with this particular seminar, it was about being kaypoh, right? So now I'm beginning to think that behind every effective kaypoh, there must be an academic, because this whole session has been quite, kind of hard punching. So my question for you, Debby, is you call your group a youth-based or youth-led, right? So at some point, you're not going to be that youth anymore. You're going to be like the ones next to you, like kind of kaypoh people, right? So how do you, what's your view on your movement? How do you maintain this or sustain this knowledge base that you're building within because of age, right? You're gonna go. So are you gonna recruit more and more new people? What about the old people with the older people with the knowledge and the practice and the the kaypohness, right? Which is really important in what you're doing. So how do you what are you thinking about your organization? How are you gonna sustain that kind of internal wisdom?
The gentleman next to you.
Okay. Well, here we are.
Oh, hi. Hi. Before I ask my question, also something that's interesting to point out, Debby, is I have friends in India who are environmental activists, and one of the biggest splits has been this notion of climate emergency and change, and the older generation going, nobody talks about the environment anymore, right? And like all our work is forgotten. So like that, it's not just in Singapore. Like it's elsewhere that I see that happening. But more broadly, my question is, how so first and foremost, community, right? With experience in doing community-based research and all that stuff, the community is not taken for granted. There are tensions and differences and all that. Like, how do y'all go about doing your research and create sort of not creating, but bringing people together in a community that's constructed as much through your partnership with them? And I guess leading to that is the kind of the nexus between advocacy and research, right? So how might academics work with y'all? And to sort of throw the tension out there, right? So hegemonic knowledge production vis-a-vis the West is always, what's so surprising about this, right? That's the first thing you get asked. But also, when you do your research, is always, how are you wrong, right? And there are different things that come out, and how might that differ or align with how advocacy-based research, in your practice of advocacy-based research, where's the convergences, where's the divergences, and how might academics sort of work together with y'all through these tensions? That's my question.
All right. Debby, you want to start?
Yeah, thank you so much for your questions. They are really big questions. And so to the first question on how do we sustain our organization, I think as an activist group, to be honest, I feel that every cause is working towards its end. So if SG Climate Rally one day does not need to exist anymore, that's the day that I'll celebrate. Quite simply. But of course, maybe that will not be possible in my lifetime. And so I think that I go back to the root of what began this movement, and in a sense, why it's so connected to youths. It's other than the fact that we will be here longer to see more devastating effects of a climate crisis, I think the Global Fridays for Future movement is an action from the youths who cannot vote, and it's a way of taking back our power in this democratic setting. In basically trying to maximize doing what we can. So I think that's where we will remain grounded, and I believe that there are many other spaces that are open and maybe of more interest for the older generation. I would say that we are not completely shut off to it. In fact, we also have seen quite a lot of support. I remember during the rally, actually one old man, he said he heard from his friend this morning that there was a rally about climate change and he decided to come down. So yeah, but I mean also because our work is mainly social media based, that's how we reach out to our audience. So I think our audience is also naturally younger who use this kind of social media lah. So yeah, I think this is a question that we'll continue to think about and we'll continue to confront as we all get older together.
Also, you all have parents.
Oh.
Some of us may not
Yes.
be so lucky.
As in, how do I engage my parents? Wow, that's damn tough, honestly. You do. Well, my mom works in sustainability, so I do think that it's also a matter of socialization. I think that when I tell my parents that I'm going to protest at Hong Lim Park, they get very scared lah, obviously. But it's over time when you start to make these actions of democracy seem less foreign to the public, then I think that's where you get more participation as well from all walks of life. And to be honest, the climate movement is not just a political movement, it's also very, very much a business-centric education movement from various angles. And so to the question about conservation work and whether it's relevant currently or whether it's been forgotten, I think that all this have laid the foundation definitely for us. And in seeing the work of maybe so-called our predecessors in conservation space, we can learn a lot from the ways that they engage and they continue to do the research that we need to back our political movement. So I believe it's like a hand-in-hand thing. We do not have the resources to do all of that ourselves, and neither do we have the experience. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so as for cooptation, I would say that there's a new phenomenon that's even worse. It's called the creation of endless gongos, right? Who crowd up the space, who suck out the air, who jostle for space, who also go for, you know, like Tidor and then jostle to speak. They are not genuine CSOs, and they present themselves regionally and internationally as CSOs, right? And it's very, very difficult for us now. Like, so Home is an independent migrant worker NGO. There are so many government-funded gongos that present themselves as NGOs, right? And I feel that that's a much more difficult thing for us now to deal with as well. So we used, Home's hotline number used to be on MOM's website when they give studying programs. Now all they do is just give MWC, CDE, etc. numbers, right? So for me, you know, it's not just the cooptation, it's also this phenomenon of creating gongos all the time, not just in migrant workers' rights spaces, but now even in women's rights spaces, etc. Yeah.
Which is probably a sign that we are not actually being co-opted, because otherwise they wouldn't need to create the Congos. So I sort of give myself a little bit of consolation from that. I think it is some whether how not to be co-opted. Number one, you have to have diverse, for the bigger groups, you have to have diverse sources of fundraising, so that you are not just dependent on government fundraising, because that's a really sort of a reason that people will feel like, oh, better not speak up, right? So I think that's one of the things that we've tried to work hard on. You try to use your relationship to your advantage, and you kind of need to be sort of savvy about this. You can do things, having a conversation with them doesn't mean that you're being co-opted, because you can agree to disagree. And I think it's better to have that conversation, to know where they are coming from. Being able to have that conversation means that they can tell you more things. Now, you also have to be critical about what they tell you, because maybe sometimes they're telling you things for a purpose, and to, you know, but you have to weigh it. It helps also to have like different, I'm not the only one, you know, I bring back a lot of the messages from the government, but I'm certainly not the only one trying to decide how to decipher this and what to do. So you do need to have also people in your organization who are, you know, more cynical, also, you know, like a range of different views, right? So that you can sort of weigh things up, right? So I think that's important, and the department and the board working on this have been really important for me. There are ways that you can work with government where you disagree, but you're not so disagreeable so that they don't become so defensive and they want to kill you. So that's sort of, I suppose, tact and diplomacy, but it doesn't mean that means we are agreeing. It's just that we are going to give some more face, and we will do some things so that we don't embarrass. So when we write any of our reports, we will give them an advance copy. And if some of the departments go through line by line, they're like, oh my God, that's a lot more extra work. But it doesn't mean that we have to take into, if we don't agree with what they said, we'll just put it in a footnote. If we like, okay, this was not so accurate, that's good, because we also don't want to have an inaccurate report coming out, right? So sometimes the corrections are right, sometimes we disagree, we just put it in a footnote. But we've learned to play this game where we actually just, it doesn't hurt us to give them an advance copy, so we do. Yep. So I think there are ways. Thanks.
We'll do one quick last round because I'm cognizant of time. So, Cherry?
Thanks. This is partly an excuse, this intervention is partly an excuse to respond to Lily, to POFMA you. In case people heard you say that I might be the person who came up with the idea of the conference, I disclaim most of my that responsibility. It wasn't my idea. But the serious question is, it has to go to tactics in working with government. Of course, it's, you know, I would completely understand the strong impetus for NGO, civil society groups to make some kind of accommodation in the government because they are the powers of the land. I mean, they can help you achieve the things that you need to do, right? So my question is this. In view of the fact that most of you have mentioned that one of the sources of strength is alliances of all kinds with other NGOs, with artists, academics, and so on, a smart government trying to make sure that you don't go out of control would attach conditions to working with you, right? So yes, you get a seat at the table, but the quid pro quo is you limit yourself to backroom advocacy. We don't want you to embarrass us in public with too much front stage advocacy. Give us face, and we don't want you to partner with groups and activists that we consider too troublesome. So my question to actually everyone in the room is, have you been offered such deals, and what is your, how do you deal with this, I think, very, very difficult dilemma, right? So you have a chance to actually make an impact. You've been offered a seat at the table, and you know that your good work is going to be advanced by that. But the price is you have to not let down others, but certainly limit the long-term power of civil society by not making the alliances that you yourselves have said are valuable.
Can I take this? Sure. I'm in the category of small troublemaker that you mentioned. So I have to say that in my engagement with the powers that be, they have never asked us for anything quid pro quo. But in this one instance, I'm contemplating something. It's a multi-agency situation that we're in. So we are two civil society people, and the rest are government agencies. And the agency I hate most is NEA. So under the chairmanship of NHB, we surface an issue up to NHB, and NHB will just sort of write the backdrop and say nice things, and then introduce me to the NEA person. And that's it. Then I follow up, and this NEA department is so strange. I can't get a straight answer for them. I mean, we have been wanting things like public toilets, which were really always a part of what Bukit Brown Municipal Cemetery provided. And we get all sorts of strange answers for not providing it. So someone told me this trick, and it's someone within this work committee who told me this. He said, I think you just do a survey every time you do a tour, and you ask, what facilities do you need? Do you need toilet? Yes or no? Blah, blah, blah. And then when you have enough of respondents, you surface it up to perhaps NEA. I'm just wondering whether I should do that, because the NEA officers on the ground also oversee people like the tomb keepers, who are very good friends. So this, I'm not saying it's a dilemma yet, but I'm contemplating, because I think it's about time we work towards having toilets at Bukit Brown. If we are going to work towards UNESCO status, I think we should provide toilets somehow. Okay, that's it. That's an adult.
I think that there is another frame through which to think about how to how to create the conditions where the state has to respond, or the government has to respond to the demands that the people are making, not just through building these alliances and relationships and making compromises or quid pro quo arrangements, but thinking through the frame of how can we cost them. We have the power to cost the state votes, to cost the withholding of labor power, the withholding of rent, the withholding of many things that we provide, create constantly as workers, as citizens. So I think it's helpful to think in terms of what we can cost employers, companies, what we can cost the state. So the state is not the only player, right? There are corporations. There are many different actors in positions of power that we are fighting the oppressions of. And I think it is, like, so I guess I'm like, it's probably no secret that I'm in a position where I'm not invited to anything, right? Like, as a big troublemaker. Okay, no back door. I've never been in a closed door meeting in my life. Never met. I mean, I've met MPs by like bringing petitions to them with a group of people at an MPS session, but not through being invited. I'm not invited to any meetings, right? Ever. But I think it's still possible, and in the work that we do, organizing workers or tenants, we have had wins through the threat of what we can cost those in positions of power collectively. So I do want to encourage the inclusion of that frame as a way in which we think about how we engage with power, right? And I think I just wanted to quickly comment on the question about co-optation. I think it's really important for organizers and activists to have very clear, like to have ideological clarity, right? So, and I think, and maybe another way to think about knowledge-based, whatever, organizing, activism, advocacy, is the clarity in our knowledge, right? Where are we learning from? What are our ideologies, and do we have clarity in that? And then when we and also like allowing our, like constantly, I think activists need constant self-reflexivity to keep questioning the strategies we're using, the choices we're making. Why did we choose to sign the statement? Why didn't we choose to do this action? To have a practice of self-criticism and holding each other accountable is really important in any political climate, least of all this one. So yeah.
Okay, last question, then we have to go because we're really ready now.
Just a quick one. I just give the mic. I have a curiosity because I think So Koki, I was wondering, like, you spoke really beautifully about how, in your moonshot, right, about involving community in becoming the actors of their political future. So I'm curious, in your work, how much success have you seen in community sustaining that? Because we all know it requires so much labor, right? So how are you sort of seeing that happen in reality, right? How do you sort of sustain this really difficult situation, given that even as activists yourselves, it's hard to do such work. So how do you sort of involve the community in this, this direction, in wanting to be involved more deeply, and in fact taking a more participatory role, and in fact leadership role in this kind of organizing work? Yeah, I'm just curious if it has happened, if you could give some concrete examples. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. It happens all the time, and I think it is actually a lot more natural and easy for communities, leaders to become organizers, or worker leaders to be organizers, than people outside of those neighborhoods or outside of that sector, right? So I wouldn't say it's so much a process of us having a particular practice as organizers and then bringing those community members or workers into this practice and building the capacity to do what we do, but seeing what are the rhythms and ways in which, so there are organic leaders in many sectors, right? So if you see there's a group of delivery riders in a particular neighborhood, someone will have influence and everyone listens to them. So it's about seeing what are the natural rhythms. Or in a neighborhood, there will be organic leaders. People are having conversations with each other all the time about their problems. That's research. So it's about kind of acknowledging the rhythms of community life and workers' life, of everyday life, and what are the acts of knowledge production, sharing, activating each other that are already happening, and how we can strengthen that, right? Uplift that and support that, rather than see it as this process that is labor intensive, or that we have, that we need to then orient them to. It's really seeing how we can build from the strengths that already exist in a lot of these spaces, and try to support them in taking it to the next level, often by asking certain questions or encouraging people to gather. And so I think it is both a process of supporting existing practices and disrupting practices that are antithetical to organizing or to solidarity. So it's really about, I think, being alive first, to learning deeply from what is in community, and then responding from there. I hope that answers.